The date Revelation was written has a tremendous influence upon its proper understanding. There are two camps when it comes to dating Revelation. Those who hold to an early dating, and you would have preterists and partial preterists in this camp, and those who hold to a late dating, and in this camp you would have futurists, idealists, and historicists. Preterists, those who hold to an early dating, believe that Revelation was written by John in about AD 65 or 66, just after the outbreak of the Neronic persecution, which happened in November AD 64, and just prior to the eruption of the Jewish War of AD 67 and the Roman Civil Wars of AD 68. Futurists, on the other hand, hold that Revelation was written in AD 96 during the closing reign of the Emperor Domitian. This dating is important in our understanding of what Revelation is talking about. If the book of Revelation is written in AD 96, then it cannot be speaking prophetically about the coming destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, as preterists believe that it does. As mentioned before, I hold to a partial preterist view and therefore the early dating of Revelation. So what is the evidence for an early view? So firstly, there are historical documents that tell us that John was exiled to Patmos during the reign of Nero. In fact, the earliest existing version of the New Testament, called the Syriac, includes a sentence right before the book of Revelation that says this: "Again, the revelation which was upon the holy John the evangelist from God, when he was on the island of Patmos, where he was thrown by the Emperor Nero." Now, Nero ruled over the Roman Empire from AD 54 to AD 68, so this negates a late writing of Revelation. There's also other supporting evidence within the writings of Revelation itself that support an early dating, and these are what scholars call Revelation's self-witness. In Revelation 1:9, John writes to describe himself as a fellow partaker in the tribulation. He's writing as one who is going through these persecutions with his initial readers. Revelation 17:10 says there are also 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is yet to come, but when he does come, he must remain only for a little while. So looking at this, if Revelation was written during the reign of the Emperor Nero, as the Syriac states, then Nero is the one referred to here. So looking at the emperors around his time, if you look back at those who reigned before him, you have Julius Caesar, Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula and Claudius. So you do have 5 who have fallen. Then the one who is Nero, who ruled for 14 years from AD 54 to AD 68. And after Nero came the 7th king or emperor, Galba, who only ruled for 6 months. So here is the one who is yet to come, but when he does come, he will reign for only a little while. Again, evidence that supports that John was writing during the reign of Nero. We also have a verse in Revelation 1:7, which says, Look, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him." So this speaks of Jesus coming in judgment on the Pharisees and the religious leaders, as prophesied by Jesus himself in Matthew 23. And it refers to the people of the first century who expected to see this fulfillment, thereby again presenting a case for an early dating of Revelation. If you're interested in more on that, then I just encourage you to refer to my message, The Coming of the Son of Man, which talks about that in some more depth. Another factor that we need to consider is throughout Revelation, John clearly indicates that the time of judgment was close. You can see this in Revelation 1:1, which says that the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place. Revelation 1:3, "Blessed is the one who reads the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear it and take to heart what is written in it, because the time is near." Revelation 22:10, "Then he, the angel, told me, do not seal the words of the prophecy of this book, because the time is near." And also Revelation 22:20, where Jesus says, "Yes, I am coming soon." So these verses again are indicative of an early dating before the tribulation that came at the time of the destruction of Jerusalem. The next evidence for an early dating relates to the influence of the Judaizing heretics who are mentioned in the letter to the 7 churches in Revelations 2 and 3, and who are rebuked in several places throughout Revelation. Again, this dates Revelation prior to AD 70 because the Judaizers essentially vanished after the destruction of the temple. Next, we see that in Revelation 11, John was instructed to measure the temple in Jerusalem. The temple, of course, having been destroyed in AD 70. So yet here in Revelation, John was treating the Jerusalem and the temple as if they were still standing. You also have one of the writings of one of the early church fathers, Jerome, who wrote down in one of his books that John the Apostle was seen and he was, with difficulty, was carried to the church in AD 96 and could only speak a few words to the people. So Jerome is clearly telling us that John was feeble and infirm by AD 96. Yet in Revelation 10, God told John, "You must prophesy again about many people, nations, languages and kings." So this would seem to indicate that he lived longer and would be healthy enough to travel and speak to rulers, which again leads us to conclude that Revelation was written much earlier than AD 96 when Jerome saw John as being feeble and infirm. The final point I want to highlight relates to the evidence of the Muratorian Canon, another historical document. The Muratorian Canon, or the Muratorian Fragment as it's also known, is a copy of perhaps the oldest known list of most of the books of the New Testament. It's an 8th century manuscript that was translated from a Greek list written in Rome approximately AD 170 to 180. And in this manuscript there's a statement which says, "The blessed Apostle Paul, following the rule of his predecessor John, writes to no more than 7 churches by name." The blessed Apostle Paul, following by the rule of his predecessor John, writes to no more than 7 churches by name. So in other words, we have evidence here that Paul is writing to 7 churches after John writes to the 7 churches of Revelation. Now, if you know your history, you'll know that Paul was beheaded in AD 67 before Nero dies. And the Muratorian Canon tells us that Paul wrote to the 7 churches of the New Testament like John did, but wrote after John had written his letters. This clearly puts the writing of Revelation while Paul was still alive and before Nero died. Now, the 2 strongest arguments for a late date come from Irenaeus and Origen. And for those of you who are interested in the arguments for a late date, then I encourage you to read Gentry's book, Navigating the Book of Revelation, where he talks about the evidence against a late date and then refutes it very convincingly.